Day, St. George and the Dragon. All right. All right. Did we go through the story? All right. And we looked at the artwork, but we didn't look at the artwork after that. All right. Okay. So if you look at the building, the corner right there, right on the corner is St. George, and right next to it, circled in the blue, that is the next artwork that we're going to look at, the Four Crowned Saints. Now, the actual sculpture has been moved inside, and a replica has been placed outside. So let's take a look at its context on the outside. And for one thing, it is odd to have four sculptures or four figures inside one little niche. They're all crammed inside there. But it tells a story that four ancient sculptors during the time of the persecution against Christians by the Romans, and they have been asked to make a sculpture of a pagan god. Well, they're Christians, and it's against their religious beliefs to make a sculpture about a pagan god. And so they refuse to make a sculpture about a pagan god, and therefore they are executed. I think they are. I don't know the method of the execution. However, but the reason why we're going to look at this is because this artist, Nanni DeBanco, he got a lot of his influence from Greek and Roman artwork, especially the Roman. So if you look at the fabric on these figures, is they are highly influenced by the fabric on the figures of Roman sculptures. The pose is a contrapposto pose, so that is an influence by the Greeks. And so I really want to emphasize how important it is in the Renaissance to be looking back at Greek and Roman art. The beards are influenced by the Roman sculptors. So each of these beards is different. They differentiate the different individuals in there. So it's not like the artist knows how to carve a beard on a figure, but he carved different beards on different figures. And all of them have references in Roman art. And if we look down below, we have a little relief sculpture. Is this high relief or low relief? It's high relief. Yeah. How can you tell? Right. The undercuts and deep shadows. Exactly. So here we have the stonemasons at work. And thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And that's an illustration of what their guild members do. So on the left, you have an artist or artisan making a wall. So that's part of what stonemasons do. This guy right here is making a pillar. And then on the right, they are making a sculpture. So they're advertising what they do on the outside of this. All right, any questions about anything that we have discussed so far in chapter 21? All right, we are going to get out of this chapter, this PowerPoint, and go to our next one. All right, so much art history, never enough time to cover it all. So let's go run through the art museum. We're going to do part 2 of chapter 21. And I've got a story for you. So this is the story of King Herod. So King Herod gets married, has a lovely wife, but soon he gets tired of her and he divorces his wife. And then he gets married again to a second wife. Now, this is not very Christian of him, and St. John berates King Herod for being very flippant again of marriage, that he's not taking marriage seriously. And marriage is a very sincere trust between a man and a woman and God. And King Herod's not taking it seriously. So, but King Herod he's not a very nice king. He's a very brutal king. And he puts St. John in jail just for saying, shame on you. So St. John goes to jail. Sometime later, King Herod has a birthday. And during the birthday celebration, his daughter does a dance. And he is so impressed by his daughter's dance. That's a great gift for this, isn't it? All right. Anyways, his daughter is so impressed by, or the king is so impressed by his daughter's dance that he says to her, that was such a beautiful dance. I will give you anything you want. And she says, okay, but she doesn't know what to ask for. So she asks her mom, what should I ask for? And the mom says, ask for St. John's head on a plate. And so that's the basic story. So they behead St. John and put it on a plate and give it to King Herod. All right, so we're going to go not to Florence, but next door to Siena, to this cathedral. Remember, Italian cathedrals all look very similar because they have a white marble on the outside with a green marble that makes lots of stripes and geometric shapes. Anyways, inside the baptistry, there is this baptismal fountain, and it has 6 bronze reliefs on it. Now, Ghiberti, you remember he's the one that won the contest for the doors. He was originally commissioned to make all these relief sculptures, but he hadn't finished it. So Donatello was brought in to finish the work of Ghiberti. And we're going to look at one in particular, this one right here, which is the Feast of Herod. And it is the birthday dinner of Herod where he is served the head of St. John. And if you look closely, by the way, this is a relief sculpture in bronze. And in the front, in the foreground, we have high relief because you can see the deep shadows and undercuts. But in the background, to make it look like it's farther back, they used a low relief. So the farther back it goes in space, it gets lower and lower relief. But we're going to look at right here is somebody bringing the head of St. John. But also right here is the head of St. John on a plate. How is that possible? How do we have 2 heads of St. John? Was St. John, did he have 2 heads and they cut off both the heads? So it's called what's called a continuous narrative. And that it happens a lot in art where they try to tell a big long story in one picture. And so you have different things happening in the picture, and you will see the same characters over and over in the same picture. That is called a continuous narrative. Are we good with this definition? Do you need more time? All right, moving on. I want to again emphasize how Renaissance artists are looking back in time to the Greeks and the Romans. and finding classical influence from them. So you can see the fabric of the figures is highly influenced by the fabric that is found in Greek and Roman artworks. Also, there is a sincere attempt, or a quite good attempt, at linear perspective. So all the orthogonals line up to a vanishing point in the distance. So and then also there's another way to make things look like they're close or far away, and that's to have that high relief in the foreground and the low relief in the background. And that is akin to the atmospheric perspective. As things go back farther in space, they get lighter and lighter. Well, as things go back into space here, they get shallower and shallower, and it creates a lesser of a shadow. So the shadows in the distance are less intense than the shadows up front. So an atmospheric perspective is created in a relief sculpture. All right, I got another story time for you. You probably heard this one before, the story of David and Goliath. Well, we have two armies that are facing off against each other. We have the Philistines and the Israelites. And both of the armies are situated on hills that are advantageous, and no one army wants to leave their advantageous position to attack the other from a disadvantageous position. So they're spending days and days without fighting. They're just facing off against each other. And they're doing this for 40 days. The armies are stood in formation facing each other. And each day, Goliath, one of the Philistines, he is an absolute massive soldier. He's described as a giant. And he comes out and he taunts the Israelites every day and hurls all kinds of insults at them. And then he issues a challenge. He said, instead of both of our armies fighting and everybody dying, because both armies are well equipped and well trained, a lot of people are going to die. So let's just have a contest, one warrior against one warrior. So it'll be Goliath against the best warrior of the Israelites. And if the Israelites win, all of the Philistines will be their slaves. And if Goliath wins, then all the Israelites will be the slaves of the Philistines. So, but no single soldier takes Goliath up on his challenge. Meanwhile, far away, there is David, who is a shepherd, and he is tending his sheep. And he is instructed by his father to go check on his brothers. So he goes to the battle, or to the front line of the battle, and he checks on his brothers. And while he's talking to his brothers, he hears the insults of Goliath. And he's like, what's this all about? And the brothers explain the situation. And David says, well, I could take him on. So he goes to the king and says, hey, I can beat this guy. And the king is like shocked because, basically David is very young and he's without any military training. He's not a soldier. He would be wiped out immediately. And David says, no, I'm pretty tough. When the lions come to kill my sheep, I have to fend off the lions. And when the bears come to kill the sheep, I have to fend off the bears. And there's even been some times where I've had to take the sheep out of the mouths of the lions. So, I know how to be tough. And so the king says, okay, let me, you're going to need all the armor you can get. And so they put all this armor on David, but he's too small for the armor. He's not yet quite fully grown. And he says, you know what? I don't need the armor. So he takes it off. And on his way to go and fight Goliath, he picks up a few stones from a nearby stream for his sling. And so David faces off against Goliath. Goliath hurls all kinds of insults at him. He insults the Israelites, said, what? This is, and Goliath feels insulted because, they put out this little boy for him to fight. and like, you don't think I'm tough enough that I'm only as tough as this little boy. Well, while Goliath is hurling all these insults, the rest of the story. David puts the stone in a sling and hits Goliath in the forehead, knocks him over. But what they don't teach you in Sunday school is that David then runs up to Goliath, takes Goliath's sword, and chops off the head of Goliath. All right, so it is a pretty gruesome ending to a seemingly quaint little Sunday school story. All right, now we're going to go back to the Bergello Museum, back into this room. Do you guys remember those two entries for the contest for the doors? Do you remember St. George? Well, also in this room is the sculpture of David by Donatello, and I want you to know this sculpture for the test. And I put these two pictures in here to show you how this is displayed and to give you a sense of the size of this sculpture. Do you guys understand the term underdog? All right, in the story of David and Goliath, who is the underdog? Absolutely, it's David. David is the underdog who succeeded against a much more intimidating foe. So David is the underdog that won against Goliath. But this sculpture is not just about David and Goliath. By the way, David is standing on top of the head of Goliath. The sword in David's hand is that of Goliath. And in David's other hand is the stone that he used to throw at Goliath. All right, so like I said, this is not just about David and Goliath. This is also a metaphor for Florence and Milan. Milan is a nearby city-state. Milan's army is much bigger and better and more well-equipped and better trained than Florence. They had a war, and Florence won. Florence was the underdog against Milan. So this is a symbol of that war. But it's not just about Florence and Milan. This is also about Medici and the enemies of Medici. In the time, this is the early Renaissance. And so the Medici are an up and coming family. They're getting more powerful. They're not the huge, giant bullies that they were in the late Renaissance and even into the Baroque era. And as they are coming up, they create a lot of enemies. And so they see themselves as the underdog surrounded by bullies. All right, now, this sculpture is very important to the Renaissance. It is the first important nude sculpture of the Renaissance since antiquity. Now, we saw the first nude in the Ghiberti, but this is the first, what do they call it? Monumental nude, right? Something of life size or larger. And this creates a little bit of a controversy. One of the things is it's a little bit more nude than a person without any clothes on. He is wearing some clothes. What clothes is he wearing? Do you see it? What is he wearing? Yeah, it's a hat. It's a shepherd's hat. And then he is wearing armor on his shins, like shin guards. Now that is more tantalizing and more erotic than just a naked picture. Later on this semester, I'm going to show you a painting of a woman laying down on a bed, and she is completely naked except for a choker necklace. By the fact that she has a choker necklace, it's more erotic than if she wasn't wearing anything at all. All right, having a little bit of clothes is more scantily, or is more tantalizing than having no clothes at all. All right, and then we can see the back of it. Now, what would you call this pose? Yeah, it's contrapposto. Is this contrapposto just a little bit exaggerated? Yeah, right. So this pose is a little bit too much of a contrapposto. It's a bit of an effeminate pose. All right. Yeah, I colored in the I did a really bad job of coloring in the bottom of the sculpture. Below the head of Goliath is a laurel wreath, signifying, or it's a symbol of victory. On top of his shepherd's hat, he has a laurel's wreath, which is a symbol of victory. If we look close at the sword, we can see all these nicks in the sword. This is not a fine, beautiful sword. This is a very blunt weapon. All right, it's the sword that Goliath used to slay all of his enemies, and he has lots of evidence of previous battles on this sword. And then on his other hand, like I said, it is he shows the rock. All right, now on the helmet of Goliath, there is a relief sculpture of Eros, the triumph of Eros. So Eros, the god of love, is being carried by Cupids in his chariot. Now, a lot of people have said, or our historians point to this and say this is evidence of homosexuality, that either Donatello was homosexual, or his client that hired this was homosexual, or that there was some kind of homosexual message in this sculpture. So that's some evidence that this is a homosexual, or it's a sculpture that promotes homosexuality. Another piece of evidence, if you look at the backside of the sculpture, Goliath's helmet has these big wings. I don't know if you've ever seen wings on a helmet, all right? And the feathers of this wing go all the way up David's leg and almost touch his privates. And so art historians say that this is evidence of homosexuality. And then, like I said before, that the pose here is a little bit of an exaggerated, effeminate pose. And that art historians say there's evidence of homosexuality. But RoboCop, the actual RoboCop, Dr. Peter Weller, the actor that plays RoboCop, I read his article on Donatello's David, and he has a different idea. So one of his things that he says is that we're looking at David from the wrong angle. It was meant, and it was originally displayed on a large pillar, right, which is way above our heads. So we are not meant to be looking at it from the front, but we are meant to be looking at it from below. And that Goliath's head should be at or above eye level. Another thing is that this pose is very common in the Renaissance. So this is the pose of the defiant youth. And we find this pose in a lot of artworks. So RoboCop, Dr. Peter Weller, says that this is not evidence of homosexuality, but of a defiant youth, which was popular at that time. All right, so that finishes us for Donatello. All right, we're going to get into some painting now. We're going to go to the, has everybody got this? Basically, it's painting, Quattrocento painting. We're going to go to the Santa Maria Novella, and inside there is a fresco that we're going to look at. It's called The Holy Trinity by Masaccio. Are we ready to move on? Okay, so what we have here is what is called the Throne of Mercy. I'll come back to this. All right. Uh, so at the top we have this arch and some architecture. We have God, the Father behind Jesus, which is on the cross. There's Mary on the left, Saint John on the right, and then in the corners down below are a couple of patrons or donors. So these are donor portraits over here, and then down below that there is a skeleton on top of a sarcophagus, and there's a quotation there that we'll look at in just a second. So if we get a little bit close, we can see these things labeled. And if we get even closer, we can see all three aspects of God. We have God the Father, we have the Holy Spirit, which was kind of hard to see. It's this bird right here. It kind of looks like, the white shirt of God right there. And then we have Christ on the cross, and that is called this combination is called the Throne of Mercy, where you have all three represented and with the crucifix. On the left is Mary, on the right is St. John. We have a close-up of Mary, and then we have the donors or the patrons on the outside of the space. All right, we're going to take a look at this memento mori down below. And if we get close, we can see that skeleton. Memento mori is a reminder of death. We're all going to die. I'm going to die. You're going to die. We're all going to die. So the message is live your life well. Be good with God by the time you die, because you're either going to heaven or hell. Remember, this is the 1500s, the 1400s in Italy. This is heavy Roman Catholic territory. Now, the quote that's up above, it says, "I was as you are, and what I am you soon will be." So the skeleton is talking to you and saying, pretty soon, you're going to be just like me, just a skeleton. We don't have much time on this earth, so make every moment count. That's the message. And then above, we have a lot of references to Roman architecture. We have a Roman arch. We have Ionic capitals on the sides. We have attached columns down below. We have a barrel vault with coffers. We have a Corinthian capitals on the side, pilasters, a cornice, an entablature. So all of this is references to Roman architecture. And I cannot emphasize enough how these Renaissance artists are looking back to ancient Greece and Rome for their influences. I also want you to know what a mandorla is. A mandorla is this, they call an almond-shaped halo around Christ. And this shape comes from it's almost like a Venn diagram between heaven and earth. And Christ is the go-between between heaven and earth. He is a God, so he is of heaven, but he was also a man, so he is of earth, so he is both. Now, this throne of mercy almost always has a mandorla, but this time in Masaccio's throne of mercy, it is missing. And one more thing I want to point out with this uh, fresco is that it uses linear perspective in this picture. That we have a horizon line, and right on this horizon line, we have this a vanishing point, and then all the orthogonals go towards the vanishing point. So it is a correct use of linear perspective. And I also want to remind you of chiaroscuro, which is shading from light to dark. How do you make things look like they're three-dimensional on a two-dimensional space? You use linear perspective, you use atmospheric perspective, but you can also use chiaroscuro, which is basically the same thing as shading. So we have highlights and shadows on the body of Christ, indicating that there is some space there, that light is hitting his body and creating shadows and highlights. All right, moving on. We got a story time, but this story is really messed up. So, warning. All right, so we're starting out with Gaia. She was the first god or goddess, and she spontaneously gives birth to three gods, one of which is Uranus. And Uranus is a real creep, right? While she sleeps, he comes to her bed and has his way with her while she sleeps. And from this union, or these unions, because he does this every night, they have lots of children. And these are the Titans. And some of the Titans he really loves, and some of the Titans he hates. And so, how do you get rid of the children that you hate? Leave it to the Greeks to be weird. You put them back in their mother. All right. So he puts all of his children that he hates back in their mother. By the way, she is not down with any of this, right? She's not having a good time. And so she wants this to end. So she says to Kronos, who is inside of her, she says, could you do me a favor? Tonight, when Uranus comes to bed and he is inside me, I want you to take this knife. She gives him a knife and she says, I want you to cut it off. And so he does. He listens to her and he follows her instructions. And when he is born, he throws the member into the ocean. A bunch of sea foam comes up and out comes Aphrodite. That's how Aphrodite is born. All right, from this horrible, weird, creepy story, the goddess of love, beauty, and marriage, the most beautiful of all the goddesses, she comes from this. So let's go to the Uffizi Gallery, and we're going to take a look at the birth of Venus. Are we good? It says temper on canvas. What is that temper made out of? Eggs, that's right. All right, moving on. So let's take a closer look at this painting. Here we have Venus on top of this shell coming out of the ocean. On the left, we have a couple of mythological figures floating. I think these are the winds. They're bringing spring in. And then on the right, we have another mythological figure bringing fabric to clothe Venus. In this, it to me, it looks like this is bad Photoshop. If we look at the feet of these figures, it doesn't really look like they're on the ground, that they are just kind of floating there. Even the ones that, even Venus, who is standing on the shell, just looks like, especially that foot on the left, it just does not look like it's really belongs there. And on the right, it looks like she doesn't have any weight at all, even though I can see that her feet are touching the ground, but there's no real weight, and it just feels odd. And even though the painting shows that there's deep space, like you can look, back to the ocean and it goes out to the horizon line, and there's some islands back there, some land back there. It doesn't really feel like it goes back in space. It looks like she's standing in front of a backdrop on a stage. All right. The atmospheric perspective is not really there, and you don't really have people getting smaller and smaller as they go into the distance. That's why I added Waldo into the picture. And then all the figures seem like they're on the same plane. Again, it feels like they're in a department store window display. And so this is the first female nude since antiquity, and that causes a problem. Like, male nudes are okay, but female nudes are not really okay. And the only female nude that's been allowed in the medieval era and so far in the Renaissance is Adam and Eve. The Eve of Adam and Eve is allowed to be nude because that's part of the story. But last semester, as we got into the Byzantine through Gothic, we were looking at all our figures were pretty much clothed. It was very rare to see anything of nudity, whereas the Greek art and the Roman art before that, it was lots of naked people. But having a female figure is kind of a problem. And because at the time the Catholic Church uh, had the view that women sin with their bodies while men sin with their mind. And so, yeah, I remember this is 500 years ago. They had much different ideas about things than we do now. So this painting is near pornographic at that time, and this was a huge risk by Botticelli. And it is also a reference to the Greeks and the Romans. There is, and the way that he was able to get away with this, although there was an inquisition against him for this painting, it was the Medici that helped protect him and give him legal counsel. But what really kind of helped him is that this is pagan nudity. This is not a person from the Bible. It's not a Christian story. It's a pagan story. So those pagans, yeah, it's okay for them to be nude. So that's kind of like how he got out of being in serious trouble. And it's kind of a reference to the Venus de Milo, although if you look at um, uh, how it's balanced, it's a little bit off balance. And then we have the Zephyr, and art historians don't really know if this is Chloris or Aura. But, anyways, they are blowing in the new spring. And there is an emphasis on patterns in this painting. Also, if you look at this fabric, does this fabric look like origami to you? No, right? It looks the fabric is round. All the shapes are rounded. This is not Northern Renaissance. This is the Italian Renaissance. And here's like a big difference between the Italian and the North is how the fabric is portrayed. Again, there's an emphasis on patterns. There's patterns in the fabrics. There's a pattern in the seashell. There's a pattern in the waves. The waves look very abstract and not very realistic. All right. Are there any questions of anything that I've covered so far today? All right. We are going to finish chapter 21. We're on chapter 21. So we're going to finish chapter 21 today, and we are going to begin chapter 22 tomorrow. All right, just out of curiosity, this is my first time giving a pop quiz. How did that go? All right. So if all the other chapters I had short little readings like that, that's doable. Also, I think that the memorizing one work of art helps like train you to memorize the 20 that I'm going to give you for the test.